Prisons are designed to take away freedom, but they also take away something else: choice. For the more than 2 million people incarcerated in America, healthcare is not an option. It is whatever the system decides to give them. And often, that means too little, too late. We'll uncover real stories from inside America's prisons, cases of neglect, denial, and delayed treatment that turned routine illnesses into death sentences. We'll examine the contracts, the corporations, and the policies that dictate who gets care and who doesn't. And we'll ask the question at the heart of this investigation. What does it mean for a society when the punishment for a crime includes preventable suffering? Stay with us to the end, where we'll reveal one case so shocking that it forced a state system to overhaul its entire medical program. This is the truth about America's prison healthcare. What inmates really get. The first barrier: getting seen at all. The first struggle in prison healthcare isn't medicine, it's access. In many U.S. facilities, inmates must submit written sick call requests to even be considered for treatment. These requests are often collected just once a day. Some states charge a copay fee of $2 to $5 per visit, a small sum outside, but inside, where many inmates earn less than 50 cents an hour, it can mean the difference between care and silence. Former inmates describe waiting days, even weeks, for appointments. By the time I saw the nurse, one recalled, the fever had already broken, but I could have been dead by then. Medical staff are frequently overworked and underpaid. Some prisons operate with just one doctor per 1,000 inmates, and many rely on licensed practical nurses or physician assistants rather than doctors. For minor issues, that may be enough. But for chronic or emergent cases, the delay can be deadly. We'll explore the story of Timothy Souders, a Michigan inmate whose pleas for medical help were ignored for days. Souders, suffering from mental illness and heat stroke, died after being restrained in a cell without adequate treatment. His case exposed the gap between policy and reality. Inmates are guaranteed health care under the Constitution, but what they actually receive often falls short of humane standards. In prison, the first barrier is simply being heard, and too often, the answer is silence. When pain meets policy, the copay debate. In America's prisons, medical care is technically a constitutional right, but behind the barbed wire, that right often comes with a price tag: the copay. Most states charge incarcerated people between $2 and $5 per medical visit. To an outsider, that sounds negligible, less than a cup of coffee. But inside prison, where wages average 14 to 63 cents per hour, that fee can represent an entire week's earnings. For an inmate, the choice becomes brutal. Do I spend my wages on soap, toothpaste, and ramen from the commissary? Or do I save for weeks just to see a nurse? This barrier leads many prisoners to self-diagnose or suffer in silence. Former inmates recall making home remedies from Kool-Aid, salt, or toothpaste. Others traded commissary items for over-the-counter painkillers smuggled in by other inmates. One case out of Georgia revealed the stark consequences. An inmate with chest pains delayed seeking care because he couldn't afford the copay. By the time he was seen, he had already suffered a heart attack. Advocates argue that these copays are designed not to cover costs, but to deter overuse. Prison officials say without a fee, inmates would flood clinics for minor issues. But critics counter. In a place where even the smallest illnesses can spiral, the policy effectively punishes the poor for being sick. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the copay is more than a fee. It is a barrier, one that forces inmates to weigh survival against survival, health against hygiene, life against comfort. In a system already stacked against them, it is one more way that poverty becomes punishment. The corporations running prison healthcare. Prison healthcare is not just a public service. It's a business. Across the U.S., more than 2/3 of state prison systems outsource medical care to private corporations. Companies like Corizon Health, Centurion, and Wellpath have built billion-dollar industries managing inmate health care. On paper, Outsourcing is supposed to save money. But in reality, critics argue it often means cutting corners. Former staff whistleblowers describe impossible caseloads, expired medications, and pressure to deny costly treatments. Investigations have uncovered repeated patterns. Corizon Health faced lawsuits in multiple states for preventable inmate deaths. Wellpath, one of the largest providers, has been accused of failing to treat mental health crises until inmates harmed themselves. Centurion has been criticized for chronic understaffing that left entire facilities with no doctors for weeks at a time. The conflict of interest is obvious. These corporations are paid fixed contracts. Every dollar spent on medication or outside hospital visits is $1 less in profit. For the inmate, that means treatment decisions aren't just medical. They're financial. One chilling case came from Arizona, where a federal judge found that the state's prison healthcare provider had failed to meet even basic standards. Prisoners missed cancer treatments, diabetics went without insulin, and mentally ill inmates were locked in solitary instead of given therapy. The ruling forced the state into a costly settlement, but only after dozens had died. For the men and women behind bars, prison healthcare is not just about doctors, it's about contracts, corporations, and balance sheets. And too often, it is profit, not patience, that wins. Life and death delays. Stories from the inside. One of the most common themes in prison healthcare is not outright denial, but delay. In a system overloaded with need, every day counts. And often, those days become the difference between life and death. Former inmates recall filing sick call slips for weeks before being seen. By then, infections had spread, fevers had worsened, and wounds had deepened. Consider the case of Walter Jordan, an Arizona prisoner who repeatedly begged for cancer treatment. By the time he was finally sent to an oncologist, his cancer had metastasized. He died within weeks. In a letter written before his death, Jordan accused the prison's healthcare contractor of deliberate indifference, or the story of Christina Quinlan in Florida, who suffered agonizing abdominal pain for months. Guards accused her of faking. By the time she collapsed, she had advanced peritonitis. She died chained to a hospital bed. Delays aren't always about negligence. Sometimes they are structural. Prisoners may need to wait for transport to outside hospitals. Security escorts must be scheduled. Court orders are sometimes required for specialist care. But every obstacle adds time. And inside prison, time is lethal. Doctors who worked in prison clinics describe constant triage. We had to decide who was sick enough to get outside care. One recalled. The standard wasn't best practice. It was bare minimum to avoid death. But as case after case shows, that minimum is often not enough. In prison healthcare, delay is denial, and denial can mean death. Mental health behind bars, the silent crisis. If physical healthcare in prisons is under crisis, mental healthcare is in collapse. Experts estimate that nearly half of America's prison population suffers from some form of mental illness, yet treatment is scarce, and punishment often replaces therapy. Across the country, solitary confinement has become a de facto psychiatric ward. Inmates with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or PTSD are locked in 23-hour isolation for behavior linked to untreated illness. Instead of medication or counseling, they receive discipline. One of the most infamous examples was Khalif Browder, a teenager jailed at Rikers Island, who spent nearly 2 years in solitary. His mental health deteriorated rapidly. After release, Browder took his own life, a tragedy his family and advocates linked directly to the neglect and trauma he endured inside. In other cases, inmates experiencing psychosis are restrained rather than treated. Reports from facilities in Texas, Florida, and California detail prisoners tied to beds for days or sprayed with pepper spray when they screamed for help. Former prison psychologists say caseloads are impossible. One counselor for hundreds of inmates, Sessions limited to 5 minutes at a cell door. No privacy, no follow-up. Medication, when provided, is often inconsistent. Prisoners recount being abruptly taken off antidepressants or given the wrong prescriptions. In extreme cases, inmates bartered or hoarded psychiatric pills, turning medication into another form of prison currency. The result is predictable: higher suicide rates, more violence, and cycles of untreated trauma. Prison doesn't just fail the mentally ill, it magnifies their suffering. Dental vision care, the forgotten needs. When people think about prison healthcare, they picture emergencies, heart attacks, strokes, violent injuries. But for inmates, some of the most pressing and painful issues are far more basic: dental and vision care. Dental pain is among the top medical complaints in U.S. prisons, yet treatment is notoriously limited. In many facilities, inmates can wait months for extractions, and cleanings or fillings are often considered elective. Instead of proper care, the solution is usually the same: pull the tooth. Former inmates describe being given aspirin for infections so severe their faces swelled. One recalled, "They told me the only thing they could do was yank it out. I was 28 years old. I left prison with half my teeth gone." Vision care is even more neglected. Glasses are provided only in extreme cases, and eye exams may be limited to once every few years. Inmates recount waiting months for replacements after their glasses broke. For those with poor eyesight, daily survival, reading forms, spotting threats in the yard, navigating uneven floors, becomes dangerous. For prisons, dental and vision are low priorities. For inmates, they are daily agony. And when untreated infections spread or poor vision leads to injuries, the consequences become life-altering: chronic illness in chains, diabetes, asthma, HIV. Beyond emergencies, prisons are filled with chronic illness. Experts estimate that 40% of U.S. inmates suffer from at least one chronic disease. Diabetes, asthma, hypertension, and HIV are common, but care is inconsistent at best. Diabetes illustrates the crisis most clearly. Inmates rely on prison staff for insulin. Missed doses can lead to dangerous spikes, but former prisoners describe delays in distribution, wrong timing, or being forced to inject in unsanitary conditions. One diabetic man lost part of his foot after repeated infections went untreated. Asthma is another common condition. Inmates report broken or empty inhalers, or being denied replacements until they collapse during attacks. In some cases, guards accused prisoners of exaggerating symptoms to get out of work duty. HIV care is more complex. While antiretroviral medications are widely available in society, prison systems often ration them. Studies have found gaps in treatment that allow the virus to progress. Some facilities segregate HIV-positive inmates, further isolating them and reinforcing stigma. Chronic illness in prison is not just about medical care. It's about survival. Every missed dose, every delay, is another reminder that behind bars, your health is not your own. When emergencies hit, the ambulance problem. When emergencies strike, timing is everything. But inside prison, emergencies face unique obstacles. First, guards must confirm the seriousness of the situation. Some facilities require multiple layers of approval before calling an ambulance. Inmates describe collapsing in their cells while staff debated whether it was real or acting. Even when a call is made, delays continue. Security escorts must be arranged, paperwork completed, transport units cleared. By the time an inmate reaches an outside hospital, hours may have passed. In 2014, an Oklahoma prisoner named Christopher Beck died after a severe asthma attack. Witnesses say staff hesitated to call 911, assuming he was exaggerating. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Doctors who work with prisons call this the golden hour problem. In medicine, the first hour after a critical event is key to survival. In prison, that golden hour is often lost to bureaucracy. For inmates, an emergency is not just a test of the body, it's a test of the system. And too often, the system fails. Women behind bars, pregnancy and neglect. Prisons were designed for men. But today, over 200,000 women are incarcerated in the United States, and the system has struggled, or outright failed, to provide for their medical needs. Among the most shocking issues is pregnancy care. Pregnant inmates often receive little to no prenatal attention. Checkups may be sporadic, nutrition poor, and exercise limited. Some prisons even deny vitamins or restrict access to specialized doctors. Former inmates describe going into labor while guards dismissed their pain as exaggeration. In some cases, women gave birth in cells or transport vans before reaching hospitals. A 2019 investigation found that dozens of incarcerated mothers delivered babies without proper medical supervision, a direct violation of medical guidelines. Perhaps most controversial is the practice of shackling women during labor. Though banned in many states, reports continue of mothers restrained by wrists and ankles as they give birth. Doctors and advocates have condemned the practice as not only dangerous but inhumane. For mothers, the ordeal doesn't end at birth. Most prisons separate newborns within 24 to 48 hours. Only a handful of facilities offer nursery programs. For the majority, the pain of pregnancy is followed by the trauma of separation. Pregnancy behind bars exposes the deepest cracks in prison healthcare. For women, punishment often extends beyond the sentence. It reaches into their very bodies. Elderly inmates. Aging in chains. The U.S. prison population is aging rapidly. Thanks to long sentences and tough-on-crime laws, more than 200,000 incarcerated people are now over 55. Yet few prisons were designed with the elderly in mind. Aging inmates face the same chronic diseases as anyone: cancer, arthritis, dementia. But behind bars, care is minimal. Geriatric units are rare. Wheelchair ramps are scarce. In some facilities, older inmates must rely on younger cellmates for basic needs, from pushing chairs to carrying food trays. One report from Louisiana's Angola prison described men in their 80s and 90s climbing into top bunks because lower beds were unavailable. Another from Florida recount dementia patients left unsupervised, wandering confused through cell blocks. The cost is staggering. Elderly inmates are the most expensive population to care for, yet they are often the least dangerous. Advocates argue that compassionate release could save millions, but lawmakers remain reluctant. The cost is staggering. Elderly inmates are the most expensive population to care for, yet they are often the least dangerous. Advocates argue that compassionate release could save millions, but lawmakers remain reluctant. The COVID-19 crisis. A system exposed. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic ripped through America's prisons and exposed the healthcare system's deepest flaws. Prisons are breeding grounds for outbreaks. Overcrowded dorms, limited hygiene supplies, and constant movement of staff in and out. Once the virus entered, it spread uncontrollably. By the end of 2021, over 600,000 incarcerated people had tested positive and thousands had died. At first, many facilities refused to provide testing, fearing panic. Others charged inmates copays for sick visits, discouraging reports of symptoms. Soap and sanitizer were scarce, and masks often arrived weeks late. One former inmate from Ohio recalled, "We were stacked 3 high in bunks. They told us to socially distance. It was a joke. Guys were coughing and dying around us." The pandemic also exposed disparities in care. Some prisons provided vaccines late or not at all. Others refused to prioritize elderly and chronically ill inmates despite their vulnerability. COVID-19 turned prisons into morgues, and the failures highlighted what advocates had said for decades. Prison healthcare is broken, not by accident, but by design. Thanks for watching Behind Bars TV. If this documentary opened your eyes, hit the like button and subscribe for more real stories from inside the world's toughest prisons. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.